Hello everyone, welcome to today's tutorial. We're going to take a look at your financial security today. My name's Brad Macbeth. I'm a licensed advisor here in Canada, and we're going to talk about what financial security is and how you can have the peace of mind that comes from having financial security. Now, when we talk about financial security, there's really two time frames that we think about it in. One is a future time frame. So what's going to happen in the future? How am I going to be able to live when I no longer work to earn an income? Something we usually refer to as retirement. That's a certain type of financial security. And that's not what we're talking about today. That's retirement planning, but it is an important element, of course, of financial security. What we're going to talk about today is the more immediate financial security of your day-to-day living. And when we talk about financial security, what we're thinking about is how can we deal with, can we manage the financial bumps, ups and downs, and sometimes crises that come our way. And these can come from many different sources. They can be things like the hot water tank in our house breaks down 2 days after it's out of warranty, or we're unable to work for a particularly short period of time due to illness, or we have to take care of somebody, or many of the other reasons that we're unable to work, or perhaps we're laid off for a certain period of time. Those are smaller scale types of things that we can manage in a certain way through what's called an emergency fund. And we're going to talk about your emergency fund a little later in this tutorial. The other types of financial bumps and disasters that come along are ones that they're so big we can't really manage them ourselves. We can't really save enough money to deal with them. And those generally come in a few forms. So for example, if your house burned down, if you own your house and your house burns down, that's a financial catastrophe that most of us aren't in a position until perhaps much later in life to be able to manage financially. You know, if your house is worth $200 or $500 or $800,000 or more and it burns down, you're not going to be able to write a check to rebuild that. And so you have insurance for that. You have house insurance for your house. Of course, we have car insurance. We have other types of insurance to manage all these things. So the biggest asset that most of us have is the ability to earn an income. And if that gets interrupted, that can be a particularly big problem. And so obviously, if we aren't able to work for a few weeks or even a few months, we can probably save enough money, have enough money set aside in our emergency fund to manage that. But what if that problem is more enduring? That comes in a couple of forms. Perhaps we're injured or we're ill, so we're unable to work due to that temporary disability or permanent disability. And that's just a very large amount of money that we're not going to be able to have over the rest of the course of our life. So the largest asset we all own is our ability to earn an income. And we need to insure against that for disability. Of course, the other type of insurance that people tend to carry for such financial disasters is life insurance. Because the likelihood of dying prematurely is not high, but the ability to manage for our family to continue to maintain its financial way of life, if something were to happen to one of the income earners in a family, is probably on a scale that most people can't manage. And so we carry life insurance. We carry a certain amount of life insurance to help us, to help our family maintain their way of life should the income that we generate be curtailed. Now, we also get life insurance even for perhaps the adult in the home who may not be earning an income through working, but is maintaining the home, taking care of children or other things. Because if something happened to them, we'd need to replace what it is that they're doing. So don't overlook that. If someone in the home may not be earning a particular income, but they are doing a lot of work to make the family function well. So what I want to do is share with you a couple of tools today that will help you to think about what you might be doing for life insurance. We're not going to cover disability insurance. I'll say that you should have disability insurance that covers about 60 to 67% of your monthly income for periods of years. Because if you're unable to work for years, then you're probably going to need that income replaced. But that's a complex topic for another day. Disability insurance is its own interesting and large topic. So we're going to take a look at life insurance today because it's actually fairly simple to consider, and we have a couple of tools that can help you make some really good decisions or do some analysis about your own life insurance situation. So let's have a look at those. The first is our life insurance quote tool. And so if we take a look at this tool, it's pretty straightforward and it's going to help you get some analysis about what's the right amount of life insurance price. What should I be paying for the life insurance I've got? So if you've already got life insurance, you can come here and compare what you're paying. If you don't have life insurance, you can come here and take a look at what it might cost you. And it's pretty straightforward. I'll just step you through it. We select the province we're in because that determines, really doesn't have much of an effect, but there is a tax, a premium tax that gets paid that varies from province to province, so it may slightly vary what you would pay. Then you put your birth date in. You'll see here these first three fields, birth date, gender, and smoker. Those three are the primary things that can really affect what you're going to pay for life insurance. So based on how old you are, whether you're male or female, and whether you use tobacco products or not. So we put our birth date in here, we select our gender, and then we identify whether we use tobacco or not. Now that includes all forms of tobacco cessation products, so patches, gum, whatever. Any tobacco product you're using is going to put you in the smoker category. However, the good news is if you have been clear of using any form of tobacco product for the past 12 months, you are considered a non-smoker for insurance purposes. Now we have here health class. You don't get to decide that. The insurance company decides it, but they have different rates based on what they consider your health class. And so preferred rates are the lowest rates. We get regular rates as well if you don't qualify for preferred rates. Also, there could be lower rates than that or premiums that are added on in addition if you have a particular health condition that might affect the cost of your life insurance. Now, the type of insurance here, we always or almost always recommend term life insurance. That's what most people need. So today we're only referring to term life insurance. And you're going to pick a term that kind of fits where your family's at. And generally, one way to think about it is if you have people dependent on your income, how long are they going to be dependent on your income? So for example, if you have small children, you maybe want to have you want to have your life insurance coverage in place until they finish high school or maybe they finish post-secondary education. So often we'll look at having enough life insurance until the youngest child in the home is age 20 or 25. And so you might pick a 20-year level term insurance. If you have really small children or you're planning on having more children, usually we would go with 25-year term insurance. And then we go with, we pick the amount. Now, if you don't know the right amount of insurance coverage, we're going to show you how you can calculate that. That's our other tool we're going to look at today. But for right now, we'll just look at $500,000 worth of coverage. Typically, for many families with young children that have kind of an average Canadian household income, typically we're looking at wanting somewhere in the realm of about $1 million worth of coverage. Another rule of thumb that often gets used is 10 to 12 times your annual income. So you can put your name and phone number in there if you like. We need an email address to get this. And then we click Compare Now. And so what the results are showing us here is different insurers. So this quoter looks at the pricing from all major Canadian life insurance companies. And for this particular person, so again, we're male. These are regular rates, non-smoker rates. This person is actually 45, but they're considered age 46 because of where their birthday is. for insurance purposes. And so we can see here that we get the rates from all the various life insurance companies. In this particular case, RBC comes in at the least expensive. Then we've got Empire Life, Desjardins, BMO, SSQ. You can see that we get the rates from all the major Canadian insurance companies here. Now, depending on who you are, that is this particular demographic information up here, that is really going to determine which insurance companies have the best pricing for you, because each insurance company kind of has their own sweet spot where their rates are the best. So, for some, they're focusing on women of a certain age. A couple of companies are particularly good if you're a smoker, etc., etc. Now, one interesting question I get a lot now, of course, relates to cannabis. So if you use cannabis, generally, within certain limits, same as using alcohol, that's not going to affect your insurance rates. If you smoke cannabis extensively, that may affect, or if you use cannabis extensively, that may also affect, just in the same way that if you drink a lot, if you use a lot of alcohol, that's going to affect your life insurance rates. So the other thing we can do once we've got this first result here in the quote tool is we can look at, well, what would it cost me to get a different amount of insurance? So let's switch to $1 million and we recalculate, and we can see the corresponding rates. Or we might say, well, what if I got 25 years worth of coverage instead? And again, that's going to show us the different particular rates. Now, a lot of people think that insurance is expensive. What you'll find is, if you're younger, it's actually quite inexpensive. So let's start over here again, and let's make our person 31 years old. So that's going to have them born in 1990. There we go. We'll check rates for a woman now. So you can see that for a 31 insurance age 31-year-old woman, for $500,000 worth of coverage for a 20-year level term, the cost is only $19 a month. If you go to 25 and recalculate, it goes up to 26. If we even went up to $1 million, now we're at $45 a month. Again, if you go back down to 20, you're at $31 a month. So now these prices stay level over the lifetime of the insurance policy term. So if you've got a 20-year level term, this pricing is going to stay the same for 20 years. If you've got a 25-year level term, it's going to stay the same for those 25 years. Let's have a look now at calculating out how much life insurance we might want to have. I'm going to show you a tool that you can use yourself. We have a different tool that we use that gets into a little more detail, but this one is available for you to use yourself. Let's just pull it up. Here we go. So, by the way, you can find that insurance quote tool if you're in the financial security tutorial. The insurance quote tool we just looked at, you can find just down the page. Just scroll down a bit from the page we're on and you'll find the quote tool right there. The calculator tool has a link to it. Has a button on there that says how much do I need. Okay, so let's see. Again, this is more sophisticated than the 10 to 12 times rule of thumb, but not quite as elaborate as we get when we put together an actual quote for people to look at how much life insurance they should carry. So here are the basic questions that influence how much life insurance coverage you should have. So first off is, how much of your income would your family need per year if you passed away? So let's say that you're the main income earner in the family and you're earning $75,000 a year. Well, your family's going to need to replace that income. So we'll put that in there. Now, how many years are they going to need it? So this is not the question of how many years of coverage do you need. This is the question of how long are they going to need to be receiving this extra income. So again, that's probably going to get tied to the age of your children. So if you've got a 3-year-old child and you want to make sure there's extra coverage there until the child has finished college, then that would be, and we're going to peg that at 25 years, that would be 22 years of coverage. However, you might say, well, we only need that extra income until the kids are done high school, and then the person who survives can be back at work full time, and whatever you think is right. But it's probably going to, if you have young children, it's probably going to come in somewhere at least 15 years. Could be 20 or 25. So in this case, we'll go with 20. Now, often one thing people want to do is they want to pay off their mortgage if the person, a significant breadwinner, dies. So we'll put that in there. Also, you may want to eliminate any debt you have. So if you're carrying a lot of debt, if you've got a line of credit or some car loans or credit cards you're not getting paid off, you might want to include those in there. In our imaginary person here, we'll just put in 20,000. How much do you have in investments? Now, let me be clear about this. These should not be investments that are earmarked for retirement. This is investments that are apart from that. So if you've already got your retirement covered off and you've got extra investments that you could use to help sustain your family and offset insurance coverage, that's the number you would be putting in here. Otherwise, we're just going to leave that blank. We usually want to put some money for final expenses, maybe some estate costs or legal costs. So generally, I think about $15,000 for a funeral. And then on top of that, some legal expenses. Dealing with someone's will, being the person who has to deal with their estate, is a very complex job, and it takes a lot of time. So if you can get some extra help by getting a lawyer to help you go through that process of being the executor of the estate, that can be very helpful. So usually I like to put a few $1,000s, maybe 5,000 in there. So we've got 15,000 for a funeral, 5,000 for legal and estate. If you know that you have some tax that you may have to deal with in addition, you want to put that in there as well. So we'll just make that 20,000 as well. Now, on top of that, we want to probably provide for some education for our children. Now, not everybody does that, and that's a philosophical choice. But if you are, then we need to know what the ages of your children are here. So let's say our person here has children born in 2005, one in 2008, and then one in 2012. All right, so you'll see now where we've gotten to. So the amount needed, so the total amount of life insurance here is about 1.6 million, which is going to seem like a very high number to a fair number of people. However, let's break it down, because all this is a calculation, and we can leave out things that we don't want to cover. So the amount needed for immediate expenses, $290,000. That is covering off the $250,000 mortgage, the $20,000 in debt, and the $20,000 in final expenses. So if you want to lower those, if you want to say, well, we're not going to pay the mortgage off, or we're not going to pay, or we're going to get a cheaper funeral, or what have you, you can lower these numbers. Let's do that. Let's eliminate that number, and you'll look below as I delete that number. Our number below will switch as soon as I change fields. It updates. So that's how that works. Now, this education number is tied directly to the ages of these children. So if you don't want to pay for education for your children, you can just eliminate those dates. And we've reduced the amount that we need. So again, this is just a decision about how much you want to cover. Now, the big number here, of course, is this $1.226 million. And so that is driven by the combination of these two numbers, how much income and how long. So if we said, well, maybe with the mortgage paid off, we don't have to worry so much about hitting that same income, and there's not going to be tax on it. Of course, if the income earner is earning $75,000, they're paying some tax on it, so there might be less tax coming off, etc., etc. So maybe we can say, well, you know what, we probably only need $50,000 of that income. All right, and you can see that's reduced our need substantially. And if we said instead, well, 18 years ought to cover, then, whoops, that's going to reduce our number again. So now we're down to that $1 million number that, as I say, we see very often when we're quoting insurance for families with young children. So that gives you a sense of how much life insurance coverage you should have. Now, if you want to go the simple route, you can, of course, just go with the 10 to 12 times and get some numbers on that, just so you can get an idea of how much you're paying. But if you want a more thorough calculation, this will get you started. And when we work with clients, we do a much more thorough calculation, a much more precise calculation. But as you can see, it's simply a calculation that gives you a sense of how much money are you going to need for your family's lifestyle to prevail and not be affected by the unexpected death of an income earner or someone who's providing work in the home that is essential work. So that gives you a sense of how much life insurance you need, how much life insurance is going to cost, the tools that you need to figure that out. And we're going to turn next to look at the shortest term planning, the emergency fund, and how you can think about your emergency fund and how much you might want to keep saved up in your emergency fund.
How much should we have saved for our emergency fund? Well, that seems like a simple question on the surface, but you know what? It really varies from person to person. And there are a number of factors that affect it. One of those factors is you should save 3 to 6 months of expenses. And so we're going to break that down. That sounds pretty simple on the surface, and people can think, oh, I get that. Yeah, great. 3 to 6 months, no problem. I got that covered. But we're going to take a look at where you should fall in that, because obviously there's a big gap between 3 months and 6 months. Now, it really depends on how secure your income is. As to how long this should be, how many months, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 months. Also depends to some extent on your appetite, tolerance for risk. How long do you want to be with a safety blanket for your finances? And so one of the big considerations, the key consideration in how long, whether it's 3, 4, 5, or 6 months, is what's the nature of how you earn your income? Are you an employee? Are you employed somewhere? Are you self-employed? Are you a government worker? Because that's a little more solid. Are you an essential worker? That's not a factor that we looked at previously, but now we're seeing that essential is a whole other category we maybe hadn't considered before. And so let's look at how we might break that down. So if we are, let's say that we're an employee in a business, let's say we work in the food service industry, because we look at the times we've been going through, there's been some great vulnerabilities. Food service sector, people who are parts of major events, event planning, that kind of thing. Holy smokes, those industries are, depending what area you're in, really going through some tough times. And so if you're just an employee, you are at the mercy of whatever's going to go on with that particular business. So if they're having to lay people off or shut down, or worse yet, they go right out of business due to financial conditions, well, then you're affected by that, obviously. And so that's what it looks like for an employee. It could be subtle as well. For example, you might work in a professional organization that hasn't been so affected, but perhaps that organization has said, look, maybe we could all just go down to working at 80%. We'll work 4 days a week. That way we can spread the reduced workload out among everybody, and people are at least getting 80 or 84 or whatever percent of their income. Well, again, you might want to have some emergency fund to help you cover that off. Now, if you're self-employed, of course, you can make the assessment about how viable your business is through different types of scenarios and the types of events that can come your way. So, for example, in these pandemic times, one of the things we're seeing that's doing actually fairly well in my part of the world, I can't say about others, is the landscapers are out in full force. They seem to be just going about business as usual because the way they do business isn't as affected by conditions as others might be. On the other hand, there are many self-employed people who provide services to other people. Let's say hairdressers were completely shut down for periods in many jurisdictions, those things that require close physical contact. So that's really, you have to gauge for yourself how resilient your self-employment is. But, I'm just using the pandemic example. Of course, if people are in difficult times financially, they're going to cut back probably and go cut their own grass perhaps. So that may be a scenario where something like a landscaper has got some more difficulties. Or if you're in a big recession, then you are looking at probably less house building's going to go on. So if you're in the construction industry, there'll be fewer houses starting up, fewer commercial buildings being built. If you provide services to commercial spaces, right? The malls were closed down for many weeks. But even still, maybe businesses are going to say, look, we can use our own employees to clean rather than using the outsourced contracted cleaners that we've used in the past. So these are all the things that you have to kind of gauge for yourself is what's the likelihood of your being out of work. Now, if you're a government worker, well, it depends on the type of government worker you are, but it may well be that your job is more secure. And so you're thinking, well, my job is pretty secure. Maybe that's because you provide some kind of essential work, or perhaps your collective agreement makes it pretty difficult to lay you off. And so it's just likely that your work is going to continue. And then, of course, we have the category of essential workers. So, at the forefront of those are healthcare workers, I would say, because pretty much come what may, we need our healthcare workers. Now, again, those things can vary. I've certainly lived through periods where there was major layoffs going on in healthcare. But I would say that is probably a more resilient area of work. So there you go. How many months? Well, if you're an employee in a fairly vulnerable position, then I'd want to have 6 months. If I'm self-employed, and I might have to make a decision to shut down my business quickly, I might also want to have 6 months. If I'm a government worker with a pretty solid job, maybe I'm going to say 4 months is going to be good enough. And if I'm an essential worker in an essential industry like healthcare, maybe I'm going to say 3 months. Now, perhaps you like a bigger cushion, so maybe you are an essential worker, but you say, nah, I'd still like to have 4 months or even 6 months. Then by all means, set that much money aside. All right. And so the other consideration is how much on a monthly basis. And the key there is that we're talking about saving expenses, not income. We all bring in a certain amount of income, and we may well spend it. Hopefully we're not. Hopefully we're saving a bunch of it. We're allocating it carefully. We have a great plan going. And so we may be using all our money or allocating, giving every dollar a job, allocating all our money carefully each month. But that doesn't mean that those are on essential expenses. And so when we say save 3 to 6 months of expense money, we're talking essential spending money. So that's not all your income. It's not even all your current expenses that has to be replaced for that period. And so let's have a look at what that might mean. All right. And so what I've got here is the list that we use to help people when they're putting a budget together of spending categories. By no means is this completely exhaustive. You may have expenses in other areas that aren't on this list, but it's a pretty good place to start thinking about it. And I just want to step through some of it and show you what we mean when we talk about essential expenses. So, for example, let me get my highlighter here. Oh, that's not what I want. There we go. All right. So, for example, we might consider, depending on who you are and where you give, you might consider regular giving essential. But you might consider other giving non-essential, in which case you'd say, well, I don't have to do that. So we can unhighlight that. Obviously, we don't need to do any saving when we are in a crisis mode. And so we can cut out all our savings. So you know what? I'm going to do this the other way. I'm going to highlight the ones that we don't have to deal with. So we're not going to, maybe we're going to slow down on our other giving. Maybe we definitely don't have to do any of our saving. Obviously, we're going to have to pay our mortgage or our rent. Well, again, we're living in unprecedented crazy times where apparently even that's not required. But I would definitely not plan for that. It's not a great, because people are getting their rent or their mortgage deferred, but they are going to owe it in these conditions we're living in. So you should, above all, please try to plan to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage. You're probably going to have to pay for your house insurance. You're going to have to make your second mortgage or your line of credit payment. If you've got that on your house, we hope you don't. We want to work against that stuff. Property taxes, again, these are different times where property taxes are being deferred, but you're probably going to be on the hook for that. You're going to be on the hook for your strata fees. But, you might be able to say, listen, we're not going to do any house maintenance, and we're not going to accumulate any money in our furniture fund during that time. Utilities, we're probably going to be stuck with electric, natural gas, water, sewer, garbage. But you know what? Maybe we can get a cheaper phone or a cheaper phone plan. Maybe we can cut down on our television. Well, we can certainly cut down on our television, and maybe we don't need to have the super duper online gaming, unlimited speed internet. All right, food, we're going to need groceries, but we might be able to cut back on that a bit. We can probably cut down on dining out and coffee. We can, for a period, certainly get rid of buying new clothes. Transportation, depends how you get around. You may or may not need any one of those. Our insurances, we're probably going to have to make all those payments. We probably need money for our prescriptions. We probably need money for, we may not need money for our private medical, depends on the nature of that. But often these things are difficult. You don't want to stop paying them, because if you get out of them, then you're going to be in the difficult position of having to requalify if you want to pick them up later, and possibly paying higher rates for them later. So there you have to make some decisions. In what's called discretionary, and believe me, not all these things are discretionary. Let's look, okay, well, maybe we can cut back on the hair care and the cosmetics. Not eliminate it, but cut back on it. Books and supplies, that may or may not be a necessity. Subscriptions and organization dues, we can probably cut down on. Gifts, we could cut down on. Maybe we're going to have to cancel spending money on sports and gym and music and technology. But we're definitely going to have to make our spousal support and our child support payments. We could probably reduce the amount of our personal cash that we spend. And I would say that entertainment and vacation is going to go during those periods. And then all your debt payments, you're probably going to have to make most of those. Here and there, you might be able to, sometimes, for example, a mortgage payment or other debt payments, you could say, well, can I skip a payment? Well, what they're really doing is they're tacking it on to the end. And that's maybe manageable for a month or two, but don't do it for more than that, or you're just digging yourself a deep hole. But don't plan for it. Don't plan for that as a way out. And so you get the idea here. When you look at your expenses, that's going to be the non-highlighted items on this list that you're going to have to deal with. By the way, under debt, of course, we're big advocates for not carrying any debt. So we hope that if you're in great shape, you won't have any of those things. No car payments, no credit cards, no line of credit, no student loans, and especially no payday lenders. And we hope you don't owe back taxes either. But that's not the position everyone's in right now. Okay, so you get the idea that that list that you see in front of you, that whole thing might be our entire spending in a given month. Maybe we've got expenses going on in all those areas, but they're not essential expenses. There's lots that we could cut back and lower what's going out so that we could live easily in a crisis mode. All right, so remember, expenses, not income. And then finally, we want to take the number of months. So that's where we started. We figured out the number of months. Is it 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, or 6 months? Times that essential monthly spending. And that's going to get you to what your emergency fund should be. So if you decided, well, really, I need 6 months worth, and maybe my monthly spending is $4,000 a month, but when I look at the essential spending, it's only $3,000. Well, 6 times 3,000 is going to be $18,000. That's how much you should have in your emergency fund. And again, you might decide that number is too big, and then you go back and take another pass at this list and say, well, maybe there's more that I don't have to do in a crisis. But I will tell you, as you can see from that list, we're all in a much stronger position when we're not carrying debt. And we are especially in a much stronger position when we're not carrying debt and we have a strong emergency fund. So those are two cores to our financial security plan. Another one, of course, is insurance, many different types of insurance. We talked about life insurance the last couple of weeks. So you've got some good information there on how to really build that financial security fortress that will keep you feeling good and your family safe financially. All right. And so if you need help in any of those areas, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to point you in the right direction. We do help people in some of these areas. We also have some financial coaches that we work with to help people out in these particular areas if they want to get down to some really detailed support in making these changes in their life. And I can tell you that, let's call it 6 years ago. That's when my wife and I started on this journey. And we walked through the baby steps, and we started with our basic emergency fund. And so let me just address that. Your base emergency fund while you're trying to get rid of your debt. So don't be squirreling away $18,000 in emergency fund money while you're carrying $22,000 in debt. That's just like borrowing the money for your emergency fund. It doesn't make any sense. Pay off your debt first. So, but do put a starter emergency fund in place before you get going. And I would recommend $1,500. I believe the Ramsey organization recommends $1,000. That's in the U.S., so that would be about $1,400 here. Let's call it $1,500 or make it $2,000 if that makes you feel a little more comfortable. Get that basic emergency fund, that starter emergency fund in place, and then hammer away at all your debt, get rid of your debt, and then you get to this step of putting your big emergency fund together. So that's the process that my wife and I went through. It took a while. We had a bunch of debt, took us a while, and we were living well. We were living very well, believe me. We had a very, very nice house. We took nice vacations. At one point we had, I confess, we had 2 nice leased cars. All the madness. We had the full thing. And no emergency fund and not a lot of savings and we just decided, hey, no more. We were convicted that was the wrong way to live on many fronts, that it's the wrong way to live. And so we made that decision. Took us a couple of years to turn the thing completely around, but we got rid of all the debt. We saved the starter emergency fund first. Then we got rid of all the debt, and then we accumulated all the emergency fund. We go with 6 months, and because we like that level of comfort. And that 6 months emergency fund is stored away just like I described to you last week. So if you missed last week's episode where we talked about where to put your emergency fund, go back and watch that. and you'll know where you should be keeping that kind of stuff. And then we moved on to steps 4 and 6. We don't have 5 because our kids are past that. But that's what it took, and that's what it takes, and it's great. It's a great way to live. And the freedom is remarkable, really. Not only when you don't have the debt kind of pressing in on you from all sides, but also you have these emergency safety nets in place, along with the right types of life insurance and whatever other insurance you need. It's a much more comfortable life. That's where freedom really lies, not in having all that stuff and all that debt. So I hope that's been helpful for you today, that now you can go and sit down and do the work to figure out how much you should be setting aside for your emergency fund. Just go through your budget, your cash flow plan that you have that tells you what you're spending every month, and just tick off there what the absolute essential ones are, and then multiply the sum of those times the number of months that you believe you should have an emergency fund. So that is what we were getting at today. You can follow us on Facebook. We're there for you. Of course, you're watching us live. Some of you are watching us live on Facebook right now. Also, you can catch us on Twitter and on Instagram. And so I just want to remind you that we have that helpful article, 5 Simple Steps to the Right Life Insurance. You can download that at bit.ly/DL5steps, bit.ly/DL5steps, just as it appears there on your screen. I'm Brad McBeth. Thanks very much for joining us today from The Simple Plan.